Thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here at the Peer Review Congress. My name is Gabriel Costa, and I work at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro together with the team responsible for the Brazilian Reproducibility Initiative. And the title of this presentation is Content Analysis of Comments on bioRxiv and medRxiv preprints. Led by Clarissa Carneiro, researcher at the Charité in Berlin, and Professor Olavo Amaral is my advisor. And we also collaborated with our network from Brazil and with Mario Malicic, who just presented here. So the objective of this work is to describe the content of comments on bioRxiv and medRxiv preprints from 2020 that received between 1 and 20 comments, in the sense of form, general content, and specific contents. A comment can have more than one general content, and a general content can have more than one specific content, as shown in the figure there in the lower right of the slide. So preprints posted in bioRxiv and medRxiv in 2020 were assessed through each platform's API, including only first versions that had received at least one comment. We excluded preprints that with more than 20 comments, and from the remaining list, sampled 1,000 preprints from each platform. 11 evaluators assessed content in triplicate based on a standardized form. Discrepancies were resolved using the most prevalent answer or including content identified by our evaluators when responses were not mutually exclusive. So we can see here in this slide that we had 1,921 comments were available for analysis, around half from bioRxiv and half from medRxiv, distributed among 1,037 preprints, half for each platform as well. We can see that it was more common to the preprint to have one or two comments. In fact, the median number of this distribution is 1. And both distributions together regarding number of words per comment, they have each commenter, the distribution have a mean of 103 words and a median of 43. And this pattern is consistent between bioRxiv and medRxiv, as you can see in the distribution. For general filters of comments, we see that some of them were from the own author of the work, especially first and last authors. 6.7% were comments from organizer review efforts. For example, a lab gathering together to review the preprints. Around 10% included a summary description of the article, similar as in a peer review format. So it was also interesting to see as well that many comments included references, 25.2% for both platforms, and a little more in bioRxiv, 31.8% for him. And most of these references were peer-reviewed articles followed by other preprints and blog or websites. For comments posted by one of the preprints author, the vast majority were regarding publication status, followed by provision of additional information, study promotion, and the provision of corrections. This is from the own author of the work, a comment from the own author of the work. For example, publication status is the author saying that the preprint was published in a given journal, for example. Again, these comments represented around 11% of the sample as shown in the previous slide. For general categories of comments, the majority included criticisms, corrections, or suggestions, followed by compliments or positive appraisals and questions. And these categories, they are not mutually exclusive, okay? That's why I'm using the word included here. A comment can include a compliment and a question at the same time. As you can see here, just to show that comments could have, for example, the tree of general categories included in the middle of the Venn diagram, especially if it was a long comment. For example, an organized review effort. In this sense, it was more common for compliments to contain criticisms, corrections, and suggestions, but many criticisms did not contain compliments in the comment. There are some overlap between all categories, and we see that 55 of comments, they include all of the categories that we assessed. Here, we see that for specific contents, we have them here by each general content, and they are also not mutually exclusive. We can see in the middle and in the right that there's some overlap between questions and criticisms. Corrections and suggestions, including those about methodological design, materials and data collection, analysis. And it seems, for example, it seems reasonable that it was more frequent that questions, the graph on the right, to have more questions regarding additional information were more frequent than the other specific content categories that we analyzed. For compliments on the left, the graph on the left, the most frequent ones were about relevance, implications of the work, but also of methodological design and novelty originality. There are some compliments about readability, interpretation, and reporting as well. So there is less overlap between compliments and the other two general contents on the right. I selected here some examples of each specific content by each general content, especially the more frequent ones, but also some curious ones as well. Some of them are very easy to understand. As for example, we can see at the upper table in blue, a positive appraisal, a compliment about relevance. Oh, paraphrasing, very nice and important finding. It is interesting to see that not everything are roses in our sample. For example, the criticism regarding methodological design in the middle of the table in the red, in the lower left, that table on the left there. It seems a criticism about a trial of chloroquine, ivermectin, or one of those drugs shown to be ineffective. The commentator is criticizing the methodological design and saying that trials about a topic should be done in early outpatient treatments, and this seems like a degenerative thing. I also want to highlight the question about concepts theoretical framework in the last column of the table in the lower right of the slide. Paraphrasing, in fact, has any study conclusively proved that SARS-CoV-2 causes COVID-19? That was a comment in our sample. So everyone can come to these platforms and comment, but we saw that the majority of comments were interesting and were done by other scientists or by the general public with the intention to start an interesting discussion or to improve the preprint. So for conclusions of the work, comments in preprint platforms are sparse and usually brief. However, some of them included organized review efforts and were done by researchers in an organized manner, and or included summary reviews. Many contain criticisms, corrections, or suggestions about the preprint, about the work. Most comments address content that's generally similar to that evaluated by traditional peer review, and a more precise taxonomy of the functions of peer review would be desirable in order to describe whether post-publication peer review fulfills those roles. I would also add that still few preprints receive comments on these platforms, like said in previous presentations here. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Let's go straight into the questions back there, please.
Hi, Gary McDowell from Dollar in Chicago. I'm curious if you have a sense of the kind of person who is coming in to write anything in here. I speak sort of personally as a preprint reviewer, active in preprint reviewing, who doesn't comment in bioRxiv, but also knowing that there are, for example, preprint journal club activities where a group will get together and write a very formal structure for review, versus somebody perhaps coming in and saying of their friend's paper, great job. And maybe a subset more interesting question in there is, when you're looking at the citations that people are providing, are they providing their own citations and saying you should have cited me? I'm curious of the sort of motivations that you might be seeing here. Yeah.
Yeah, we think that maybe some kind of commentaries on these platforms, they are good for the preprint if the author read it, and a lot of them are done by other scientists. Some of them are done by the general public. So we can also think of including the public on science, you know. But there's still a lot of work to be done regarding this topic. And can you please say it again, your last question?
Oh yeah, when people are popping in a reference, you said that was I think you said 38% of the comments had a reference that people were dropping
Included reference.
Yeah, is it their own? Yeah. Is it something that that author wrote, or do you have a sense maybe that it's an anonymous comment, you can't tell, but maybe they've said you should cite my paper, you know, a common kind of phenomenon?
It varied a lot. Some were brief comments with reference, and some were organized review efforts. There are examples like I have it here just to answer to you. Sinai Immunology Review Project. It composed 55.81% of the organized review efforts. And it was really like they were really reviewing the whole preprint. And in these types of comments, references were included as well, but it varied a lot.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, go ahead. And then we move on to that side.
Oh, thank you. Jennifer Byrne from Sydney. Actually, my question kind of extends Gary's question. I'm wondering whether it might be interesting to see where the comments suggested improvements to the preprints, whether it would be good to look at the papers that are eventually published to see if those improvements carried forward.
Yeah, that's the next step.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back there.
Hi, Nihar Shah, Carnegie Mellon University. So as was discussed in the morning, in some preprint or commenting forums, it's been found that authors sneakily leave comments on their own papers saying, hey, this is a cool paper and so on. So without people knowing. So just as a first order check in your data, how many of this is a unique and important finding were anonymous or without verified emails? Do you know?
There were a lot of compliments of other authors saying about, for example, what you said, novelty or originality of the preprint. But these types of comments were also done by the own author of the preprint. So somehow highlighting the results in the comment section of these platforms. Yeah.
Do we have anything from online?
Yes, Sam Hindle from the archive servers notes the difference between COVID and non-COVID activity on bioRxiv and medRxiv, and wonders if you separated the analysis for those two types, content types.
Yeah, the work is still in progress. We're still developing the manuscript. COVID certainly is a confounding factor in this analysis, and COVID preprints had less references had less references, has less reference, for example, when compared to non-COVID preprints, and they were more brief as well. So COVID started a lot of discussions on these platforms, and some of these discussions are they may not be so profound as the ones done by non-COVID preprints.
Thank you.
Lawrence, and then back there, that's the last question we're going to take.
Florence LaCroix,
Really to the point.
yes. Florence LaCroix, Georgia State University. I won't preface it. My question is, in methodology, why did you exclude greater than 20 comments? Usually 20 comments means people are not happy with this paper. You know, we think you made this error, this, and then more come in, and, you know, this is what working papers and economists do, and it makes much better papers.
Yeah, because there was a problem that there were some preprints in the sample that received, for example, 500 comments. For example, the preprint of John, who is here. Yeah, and actually, John said,
An outlier.
yeah. If we included this kind of preprint, it was published on medRxiv, so we would have that half of that estimate, that sample that we have of half from medRxiv and half for bioRxiv. If we included, for example, a preprint of John, maybe it has a lot of so many comments that maybe medRxiv would be with just 200 preprints and bioRxiv with 500. So yeah, would be a unmatched thing, you know? Yeah, that was one of the problems. And I think these preprints that received a lot of comments, they deserve to be analyzed separately. No, they are special preprints. They received a lot of attention.
Right. So we do have time for one more question, and there were people back there who, that was supposed to be the last question.
So there's Mark Helfand. So there are some of these preprints, they get a lot of press coverage, and there's a ton of commentary in the press. Some journals pick it up, make a big deal out of it. And then others like Stat and so on have extensive critiques long before the study gets published. You didn't look at those yet, right?
So sorry, can you say it again?
Oh,
Because of-
sorry,
because
you
of
didn't look at the public press, the lay press. Has a lot of comments on these preprints, and it usually takes a few weeks for the public press to decide that instead of being, absolutely true, a preprint was very misleading. I'm kind of wondering, you looked at the comments within the site, right? Within the website. Not on the public, not in the lay press.
No, we did not.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking it might be interesting to do that because it's kind of a follow-up to this 500 comment thing. After a few major publications like the Wall Street Journal says how great something is, and I don't mean to single them out. It's just an example in my head. After 3 or 4 weeks, there's a consensus in the literature that the study was seriously flawed. And so I think it'd be interesting for you to correlate what you see on the site to what is out there in
Sure.
the semi-scientific press.
Sure. The first author, Clarissa, has more background on the work, and I'm gonna definitely give your feedback to her. Thank you.